Father John Raphael is a 1989 graduate of the University of Notre Dame and currently serves as the president of St. Augustine High School in New Orleans. He's known nationally for the powerful speech he gave at the pro-life rally held at the University of Notre Dame the day President Barack Obama gave the commencement address and received an honorary degree. Convinced of the need for active witness for the protection and defense of the sanctity of life as a college student and seminarian, Father Raphael has dedicated himself to bringing more African Americans into the pro-life movement. Please join me in welcoming Father John Raphael.
Cathie, thank you very much for the introduction and the welcome, and I truly say with a sincere heart, it is a great pleasure to be with you here in Fort Wayne, Indiana today, to see the way this hall is filled up with defenders of life, with lovers of the unborn. It really fills my heart with great joy, and I must say I am very, very happy to be here. I was struck by something Cathie said earlier. I am, as she mentioned, the president of St. Augustine High School, which is my alma mater in New Orleans, and up until June, I was the principal of the high school. So if any of my students were here today, they'd be very surprised at what I am about to say next. But I am going to strongly, strongly encourage that you continue to get those failing grades that we heard about earlier. I'm going to ask that you please not put that on YouTube, because if the kids get it, then I'm going to have a lot of explaining to do, right? Again, everyone has been so gracious and welcoming to me since I arrived last night. Again, it struck me as a contrast. I mentioned this morning, a number of folks said, "Oh, I'm so glad to see you, glad to have you here." Usually when I'm at school, when I come in, everyone runs away. So it's nice to have this experience as well. As Cathie mentioned, back in 2009, I came to Indiana, to my other alma mater, the University of Notre Dame, at a time when the university made, I think, perhaps one of the worst decisions that it has made, and in conferring an honorary degree of law on a person who has aggressively committed himself to, again, probably the most radical pro-abortion agenda that has ever come out of the White House. And that visit was important for me to make on a number of different levels. It was important because, again, I am an alumnus of the University of Notre Dame, and what happens at the university is important to me. But it was also important because of the particular work that I've had the opportunity to do in the pro-life community for about 20 years now, and that is to do everything that I can to bring the pro-life message to the African American community. Well, we all know the historic dimensions of the last presidential election. And as at the time, the principal of an African-American school, St. Augustine is an all-male school, a school that encourages its students to strive for the best, to be the very best that they could be, and to take advantage of everything that America has to offer. You can imagine the situation that I was in. I frequently tell the story, when I was a child, I was told, like every other American kid, "Oh, you know, you can grow up, John, one day and be president of the United States." And I believed that. I believed a lot of things. I believed in Santa Claus, I believed in Easter Bunny, and all of those things. And in my day, there were a few attempts of African Americans who ran for president. Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton, and those were sufficient enough to convince me that this wasn't going to happen in my day. But this time we had a different kind of candidate in many aspects. He's not a Sharpton, not a Jackson. In many ways, the president's life story sort of exemplified, embodied the kinds of things that we at St. Augustine teach our young men. You know, study hard. You may have difficult circumstances coming up, but you have been given the ability, you've been given a mind, and you've been given all of the tools that you need. So this was someone in many aspects these young men could look up to. But not only that, there was the collective experience of African American people. This was a symbolic event. And as it became potentially a real possibility, as this was no longer a pipe dream, this really could happen, any persons who were involved with the African American community could begin to see the transformation. Even I could understand and appreciate the symbolism. You see, we all remembered, as we were taught, that, you know, there were once slaves who served in the White House. I don't know how many of you remember the television miniseries, I think back in the 80s, Backstairs at the White House. It covered several generations of the servants who worked at the White House. You know, now we had an opportunity that the person in the White House was not going to be the chief butler, but actually the commander-in-chief. And that was a powerful thing, and it still remains that way. Regardless of who would have been the individual to ultimately accomplish that goal, this reality and the collective experience of the African American people surrounding this reality would have been the same, be it Barack Obama or any other person who would have accomplished that. I could appreciate that symbolism. But in addition to that symbolism, there was also the substance. And what was the substance? The substance was that governments, nations, our country, we are not governed by symbols. We are governed by politicians, and politicians take positions, they have agendas, and those positions and agendas have consequences. And in reference to the protection and the defense of life, in reference to the unborn, the substance involved in this election was such that no symbolism could justify us ignoring the consequences of this agenda. That substance had to triumph. Had to triumph over symbolism. And then at the end of the day, the protection of life and witnessing to the sanctity of human life had to drive each and every one of us who understands the call that has been given to us to speak up and to speak out. So that is why I made the decision to accept the invitation to come to the University of Notre Dame, even though many in my own community couldn't understand why I would do this, couldn't understand why an African American priest would speak out publicly against the first African American president, couldn't understand it because the symbolism had blinded them to the substance. But as for me, and the sight, the understanding that was given to me, and the obligation given to me as a human being, as a priest, as an alumnus, to bear witness to life, I had to make that visit. And it is... And it is that very reason, or those very reasons, that caused me to visit Notre Dame, those are the very reasons that have brought us all here today for this wonderful rally and for this march. Why do we gather today and why do we march? Because we understand that until every single child conceived, regardless of the circumstances of that conception, until every single child is protected and defended, because those children cannot speak for themselves, you and I recognize that we have a sacred obligation. A solemn burden has been placed upon us by Almighty God to give to those children our mouths, to give to them our feet, to give to them our intellects, everything that we are and everything that we have. As human beings, as American citizens, we are bound to walk, to talk, to march, to speak out for those who cannot speak out for themselves. As I look out in this great hall, not only do I see a cross-section of the state of Indiana, as I look out, I see a cross-section of the United States of America. And this is the beauty of being an American. It's wonderful as we recited the pledge and listened to our national anthem. Why is America the greatest nation on earth? America is not the greatest nation because we are a perfect nation. We are not a perfect nation. We are not perfect people. America is the greatest nation on earth because our founding fathers had the wisdom to know and to understand that they did not have the answer to every question. That one of the greatest strengths of our nation is that it is encoded in our Constitution, it is encoded in the very fabric of our laws, the ability to right that which was wrong. And not only But not only do we have the power, the ability to change, the ability to correct our mistakes, encoded in our nation are those fundamental freedoms that have been given to each and every one of us as citizens. The freedom to do what we do today, that is to speak out. To speak out in the public square, to make our positions known, to live out our convictions. We have the freedom to act in accordance with those convictions, and we have the ability to bring about real and true change. We are a government of the people, for the people, by the people. Therefore, we, the people, have determined that we will no longer allow our nation to destroy its future while it remains in mother's womb. That is who we are. That this is not theory, because today in 2011 we live in America where Dred Scott is not the law of the land, but it's a bad memory. And just as Brown versus the Board of Education destroyed Plessy versus Ferguson, we are looking for the day and listening for the name that will do to Roe v. Wade what Brown did to Plessy. What we are doing here today is not novel. We are not starting a new American tradition, no. We are in the tradition of the abolitionists of the 1850s. We are in the tradition of the civil rights workers of the 1960s. And most importantly, we are in the tradition of those who have hungered and thirsted for justice for over 2,000 years. This is nothing new. But it is important for us to be strong, to be firm. You know, sometimes we hear the statement, well, we have to change hearts before we change laws. That's not the case. You know, we didn't end slavery in the United States because the South decided that, you know, we were through with that. We didn't end segregation in the South because the Jim Crow supporters all of a sudden decided to do things differently. The laws were changed, and hearts caught up with the law. And that's what we have to do today. We are here to change laws because laws teach. And as we change laws, not only do we protect lives, but we're also shaping a new generation, shaping them by the teaching power of laws that are in conformity with the truth. Tell a little story. Bishop Rhodes is here. I'm going to have to beg his indulgence for one part of it. I was traveling one day, and I generally travel in my collar, but this time I wasn't. You know, I was in one of those days where as a priest, I wanted to just be anonymous. I didn't want to be bothered. And so I'm sitting on the plane, and at the layover, I had a layover, I noticed as I was getting off the plane that our senator was on the plane. Now, the first thing I said, well, to myself, well, at least she's traveling coach. I was in a particularly foul mood that day because my plans had been changed by the airline. I was supposed to have a direct flight, and I ended up being switched and having a layover. So as I was getting off the plane, I said to myself, should I confront her? And I was like, no, I just don't feel like being bothered. And so I was walking, and she is not pro-life. But as I was walking, I said, wait a minute, I can't do this. So I was a bit ahead of her. I began to slow my pace down a bit, and I let her catch up to me. I said, Senator, how are you? Oh, sir, how are you? I explained to her that I was from St. Augustine High School. We're from the same city. She recognized, oh, great school, great band. I said, yes. And then immediately I began to ask her, keep in mind, I'm in lay clothes, I'm not in collar. I began to ask her about her abortion record, and it caught her off guard. I mean, she just assumed, I guess, looking at me, that I would have been an automatic supporter of her and her positions. And I began to query her about her voting record and to challenge her on her voting record and to express my deep disappointment in reference to the positions that she had taken. And then finally, at some point, she stopped and she said, well, what would you have me to do? Yo, do you want me to put a 15-year-old girl in jail? I remember turning to her and said, Senator, you are a legislator. I said, legislation always makes distinctions. If you can't tell the difference between a 15-year-old girl who has been pressured into a decision that she may not have wanted to make for herself and a 50-year-old abortionist who is profiteering off the blood that he is extracting in a violent and vicious way from that 15-year-old girl and her child, if you can't make that distinction, Senator, are you worthy of being called a legislator?